The Washington Post published a story on Saturday night that the White House did not want you to read. Not because it is false, because it is true. While Donald Trump has been posting on Truth Social that talks with Iran are going very well, while he has been extending deadlines and describing productive conversations and telling the American public that a deal is close, the Pentagon has been doing something entirely different in classified meetings that had nothing to do with diplomacy. It has been drawing up plans to send American soldiers into Iran, not a full invasion, not a declaration of war, something more surgical and more dangerous, special operations raids, conventional infantry assaults, a ground offensive against Iranian coastal positions and potentially Kharg Island, the tiny strip of land in the Persian Gulf from which 90% of Iranian crude oil is exported, the kind of operation that puts American boots on Iranian soil for the first time since 1980. And the man who has to say yes to all of it, Donald Trump, has not said yes yet. But the plans are ready, and they have been war-gamed. And according to the officials who spoke to the Washington Post on the condition of anonymity, this is not last-minute planning. And Iran's parliament speaker found out. And he went on state television and said, "Our men are waiting for the arrival of the American soldiers on the ground to set them on fire." That is where this war stands on day 30. Let us go through exactly what the Washington Post reported, because the specific details inside that story change everything about how you should understand the diplomatic track that Trump is publicly describing. The Post quoted multiple U.S. officials who said the Pentagon has spent weeks developing options that stop short of a full-scale invasion. These include short-duration missions using special operations forces and regular infantry troops to achieve specific limited objectives. The two primary objectives under discussion are, first, raids on Iranian coastal positions near the Strait of Hormuz to locate and destroy the weapon systems that have been used to attack commercial and military shipping throughout this war. The missile batteries, the drone launch sites, the small boat bases, the shore-based systems that have turned the Strait of Hormuz into what U.S. officials have described as a death valley for commercial vessels. And second, the possible seizure of Kharg Island itself. The officials who spoke to the Post said one person estimated the objectives under consideration would probably take weeks, not months, to complete. Another put the potential timeline at a couple of months. And a former senior official described the planning as extensive, saying, "We have looked at this. It has been war-gamed. This is not last-minute planning. War-gamed." That means the Pentagon has run through the scenarios, the casualties, the Iranian responses, the escalation paths, the exit strategies, all of it, before Trump said yes to any of it. And the official word from the White House when asked about this story was a statement from Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt that said it is the job of the Pentagon to make preparations in order to give the commander-in-chief maximum optionality. It does not mean the president has made a decision. Maximum optionality. That is the language of a White House that knows the decision point is coming and wants to be ready when it arrives. Now let us talk about Kharg Island specifically, because it is the centerpiece of everything the Pentagon is planning, and most Americans have never heard of it and need to understand what it is and why it matters so much. Kharg Island is a coral outcrop in the northeastern Persian Gulf, roughly 16 miles off Iran's southern coast. It is approximately 5 miles long and 3 miles wide. About a third the size of Manhattan, according to CNN. It is not a large piece of land, but it is the most economically important piece of land in Iran outside of Tehran itself. Approximately 90% of all Iranian crude oil exports pass through Kharg Island before they are loaded onto supertankers and shipped out through the Strait of Hormuz. The deep surrounding waters allow the largest tankers in the world to dock directly at the island's jetties, which is a geographic advantage that most of Iran's shallow Persian Gulf coastline cannot offer. Every barrel of Iranian oil that reaches China, the country that has been buying it throughout this war, passes through Kharg. Every barrel that was reaching the market before the war closed, Hormuz went through Kharg. The entire revenue stream that funds the IRGC, that pays for Iran's missiles and drones, and the salaries of the fighters firing them at Israel and the Gulf states every single day, flows through Kharg Island. If the United States seizes Kharg Island, it does not just seize a piece of Iranian territory. It seizes the financial engine of the Iranian war machine. It seizes the leverage that Iran has been using to fund 30 days of the most intensive missile campaign the Middle East has ever seen. That is what is on the table. And that is why what happens next with this decision is the most consequential military choice of this entire war. Senator Lindsey Graham has been the most vocal public advocate for seizing Kharg, and he said something on Fox News Sunday that ignited a firestorm across both political parties in Washington. He said the following words on national television: "We did Iwo Jima. We can do this. My money is always on the Marines. Iwo Jima." The Battle of Iwo Jima was a 36-day campaign in February and March of 1945, in which American forces fought Japanese defenders for control of a small volcanic island roughly 700 miles south of Tokyo. American forces suffered more than 26,000 casualties during that campaign, including nearly 7,000 killed. Fewer than 1,100 of the approximately 20,000 Japanese defenders survived. It is the bloodiest battle in Marine Corps history. Graham invoked it approvingly as the model for seizing a small Iranian island in the Persian Gulf. The backlash was immediate and came from both sides of the aisle. Democrat Jason Crow, an Army Ranger and veteran of Iraq and Afghanistan, posted that the nearly 7,000 Americans who died and 19,000 who were wounded at Iwo Jima did it to fight for our freedom with the support of Congress and the American people. Republican Nancy Mace said Graham has one foreign policy, and it is to send someone else's kids to war, calling him wrong about Iraq, wrong about Afghanistan, and wrong about Iran. Marjorie Taylor Greene called Graham a psychotic neocon willing to send U.S. Marines in to be slaughtered in Iran. Former NCTC Director Joe Kent said deploying troops on Kharg would be a disaster. Even within the Republican Party, the Iwo Jima comparison landed as a political disaster. But Graham's strategic case, whatever you think of his rhetorical execution, reflects the actual military planning that the Washington Post reported is already underway inside the Pentagon. Here is what the military experts are saying about the actual feasibility of a Kharg Island operation and why the consensus among professionals who have studied this is significantly more pessimistic than Lindsey Graham's television enthusiasm. Michael Eisenstadt, director of the Military and Security Studies program at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, and a retired Army officer who served in Iraq, Israel, and Jordan, told the Washington Post directly that he just would not want to be in that small place, with Iran's ability to rain down drones and maybe artillery. He described seizing the island as coming with significant peril. He suggested a smarter ground mission might be for U.S. troops to clear out some of Iran's coastal military sites near the Strait of Hormuz, rather than going after Kharg itself. A former senior official who spoke to the Post acknowledged the strategic appeal of Kharg as a bargaining chip, saying that seizing Iranian territory could embarrass the Islamic Republic and provide valuable bargaining chips in future negotiations. But the same official immediately identified the central problem. You have got to provide cover for the people on Kharg Island. That is the difficult task. Seizing it is not difficult. Protecting your guys once they are there is. That is the official who has seen the wargaming. And he is saying the hard part is not taking the island. The hard part is holding it afterward while Iran rains everything it has onto a small piece of coral 5 miles long with American soldiers on it. Retired Admiral James Stavridis, the former NATO Supreme Allied Commander who now serves as a CNN military analyst, delivered one of the most sobering assessments of what a ground operation would actually look like in practice. He said Iranians are clever and ruthless. They will do everything they can to inflict maximum casualties on U.S. forces, both on the ships at sea and especially once ground troops are anywhere in their sovereign territory. He said he would be very worried about this. Admiral Stavridis is not an anti-war commentator. He commanded NATO. He has seen operations plans. He knows what Iranian military doctrine looks like in practice. And he is telling you directly that putting American soldiers on Iranian soil would trigger exactly the kind of maximum casualty Iranian response that the ground operation planners are trying to account for in their wargaming. Previous strikes have already degraded some of Kharg's air and sea defenses, including surface-to-air missile systems and anti-aircraft guns. But Iran has been responding to that degradation. CNN reported that Iran has been laying traps and moving military personnel and air defenses to Kharg Island in recent weeks, specifically in preparation for a possible U.S. operation. Iran is not waiting passively. Iran has been watching the American troop deployments, watching the Marine Expeditionary Units arrive, watching the 82nd Airborne paratroopers deploy to the region, and it has been hardening Kharg against exactly the kind of amphibious assault the Marines specialize in. It has moved shoulder-fired man-pad surface-to-air missile systems onto the island. It has laid traps. It knows the Americans are considering this, and it has had weeks to prepare. Iran's own Navy chief went even further on Sunday. Admiral Shahram Irani said directly on Iranian state media that the USS Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier would be targeted if it comes within range. That is the commander of Iran's Navy threatening by name to target a specific American aircraft carrier. The USS Abraham Lincoln is one of the most powerful warships in human history. It carries 90 aircraft and a crew of more than 5,000 Americans. Iran's Navy chief is publicly threatening to attack it. That threat is not abstract. Iran has already struck the Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia twice in the past week, wounding more than 24 American service members in 2 separate attacks. Iran has demonstrated throughout this war that it is willing to take the risk of directly hitting American military assets. It has done it repeatedly. A threat against a carrier group from Iran's Navy chief is not bluster. It is a declaration of intent backed by a demonstrated willingness to follow through. Now, here is the military reality that surrounds the ground operation question from the American side. The U.S. has deployed what CENTCOM officials described as the largest American military force buildup in the Middle East in over 2 decades. The USS Tripoli, an amphibious assault ship, arrived in the region carrying approximately 3,500 Marines and sailors, along with aircraft and tactical assets. 2 Marine Expeditionary Units are now in the region. These units specialize specifically in rapid response amphibious landings, raids, and assault missions from Navy amphibious ships. They are the exact units you would need for a Kharg Island operation. Approximately 1,000 soldiers from the 82nd Airborne Division are also deploying, with reports suggesting that number could reach 3,000. The 82nd Airborne are paratroopers trained to land in hostile territory from aircraft, secure key positions rapidly, and hold them against counterattack. A former CENTCOM chief has publicly confirmed that the U.S. has persistent overhead surveillance of Kharg Island. CENTCOM has been watching it continuously. The combination of Marine amphibious units, 82nd Airborne paratroopers, and continuous overhead surveillance of Kharg Island is not an accidental convergence of forces. It is a prepared and positioned operation waiting for one man's signature. But here is the complication that makes Trump's decision the most difficult military choice an American president has faced since the beginning of this war, and possibly the most difficult since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. The Gulf allies, specifically Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, and Qatar, the countries that host American bases and whose security Trump has been citing as a justification for this war, are privately urging Trump not to seize Kharg Island. A senior Gulf official told CNN that occupying Kharg with U.S. troops would result in high casualties and would likely trigger Iranian retaliation against Gulf countries' infrastructure, prolonging the conflict. The Gulf states are not anti-war in general. They are specifically anti-ground operation because they are the ones who would absorb Iran's retaliation if American troops land on Iranian soil. Their cities, their airports, their energy facilities, their populations are within range of Iranian missiles and drones. They have already been hit repeatedly throughout this war. A ground invasion of Kharg would almost certainly generate the most intense Iranian retaliation since the war began. And that retaliation would fall primarily on the Gulf states, not on the American mainland. The people urging restraint most loudly are the people who have the most to lose if Iran responds to American boots on Iranian soil with everything it has. Ghalibaf's response to the Washington Post story captures exactly the dangerous dynamic at the center of Day 30. He said the enemy openly sends messages of negotiation and dialogue and secretly plans a ground attack. He is right that both things are happening simultaneously. Trump is talking about deals, the Pentagon is planning raids. Ghalibaf's response to that contradiction was not diplomatic, it was military. He said Iranian forces are monitoring all enemy movements. He said if they take any step, all the vital infrastructure of that regional country will, without restriction, become the target of relentless, unceasing attacks. He did not name the country, but everyone in the room knows which countries host the bases the Marines are launching from: Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia. The Iranian parliament speaker is threatening the vital infrastructure of every Gulf state that allows the United States to operate from its territory the moment American soldiers step onto Iranian ground. And separately, Iran's Navy chief threatened the Abraham Lincoln carrier group, and the IRGC Aerospace Force commander already told Gulf industrial workers to evacuate their facilities. Multiple channels of Iranian military leadership are simultaneously issuing escalation warnings at the highest level of specificity they have used in 30 days of this war. and Trump has not yet decided whether to send in the troops. The Islamabad summit that Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Egypt are attending on Sunday was supposed to be the diplomatic answer to all of these military questions. The foreign ministers from those three countries plus Pakistan are meeting specifically to try to build an off-ramp that makes the ground operation unnecessary. But it is extraordinarily difficult to negotiate an end to a war when one side is secretly planning to put troops on the other side's soil, and the other side knows about it and is publicly threatening to set those troops on fire. The diplomatic track and the military track are running simultaneously. They are aimed at opposite destinations. And April 6th, the date when Trump's extended deadline expires, is when those two tracks converge and force a decision that cannot be avoided or extended again. What does it actually mean for the American people if Trump says yes to the ground operation? It means American Special Operations Forces and conventional infantry troops going into one of the most hostile military environments on Earth. It means an island defended by shoulder-fired missiles, drones, layered Iranian military defenses, and an enemy that has spent 30 days watching American movements and preparing for exactly this. It means putting American soldiers in a place where Iran can fire artillery, drones, and missiles from the mainland less than 20 miles away. It means the families of the Marines and paratroopers who have been deployed to the region finding out that their sons and daughters are not supporting air operations from ships. They are going ashore, into Iran, for weeks, maybe months, against a military that the former NATO Supreme Commander described as clever and ruthless and willing to inflict maximum casualties. That is what yes means. And Trump has not said it yet. But the plans are ready, the forces are positioned, the wargaming is done, and April 6th is 8 days away. This is the most important story of this war, and it is moving faster than any news cycle can track. Drop a comment right now telling us what you think Trump decides. Does he send in the ground troops and try to seize Kharg before the deadline? Or does he extend again and give diplomacy one more chance? Because the answer to that question is the answer to whether this war gets bigger or starts to end. And the people in this community who have been following this conflict have been right about the big calls more often than the analysts being paid to make them.